I think this is a really special episode for you, I'm guessing, right? Because you've had a lot of people on this show that you've known. This is a person I don't believe you knew before this show, but you were just a big fan of. And I think even in one of our pre-production meetings, you told Hannah, who produces everything, not only here for the show, but also at our agency, that Treva was the kind of person that it'd be great to get someone like almost like, well, I'm sure we couldn't get Treva, but it'd be great to get someone like. And the fact that she's on the show probably, I'm guessing, means a lot to you. Can you set up for the audience who Treva is and why she was such a big get for the show for you?
So when I was a little kid, my favorite show was the Mary Tyler Moore Show. Now, it was the show that held the record for how many Emmys it got. It couldn't have been more popular, couldn't have been more respected, and has a lot to do with how I know how to do what I do. That's the show I used to, before you could record shows, this is in the 70s, I used to make a recording, like an audio tape. I used to record Mary Tyler Moore and listen to it and try to break apart the story. So I was doing that at a fairly young age. As soon as I got a tape recorder that I could do, I must have been 9, 10, something like that, when I started doing it. And I started to figure out what story structure was before I'd ever read a book about it or anything about that, because it's such a well-constructed show. And people rediscover it. Different generations. It started in 1970. The show, and it ended in 77. It was still at the top of the ratings. They just, decided to end the show. But people rediscover it all the time. And I'll try to get people to watch it, and they're like, oh, that's an old show, and they won't watch it. But when people do watch it, they're kind of amazed at the quality of the show. And people are like, that show really holds up. I firmly believe that things hold up when they are good. It's not that time makes something bad. It wasn't working in the first place. Right. So I firmly believe that it's a show that has good bones in a way, that it's so well structured that it just will last. It's about human beings, and human beings don't change that much. Clothes change, slang changes, the quality of the picture is different, low res, whatever. But the core, at the core of it, it's amazing. And the name, when I was a kid watching that show, that came up a lot was this, as a writer, was this name Treva Silverman. And I think as early as I could read, that name was on that screen. And I always kind of knew, oh, this is going to be a good one. And as I got older and watched the show over the decades, I got more and more respect for this person, Treva. I didn't know whether Treva was a man or a woman. It's not a name I'd heard before in my life. I only knew this as this person. And then later I started reading more about the show and found out who she was. And Mary Tyler Moore is one of the best shows that's ever been on television. And she wrote some of the best episodes of the best show. She is an unbelievable force in terms of her abilities. There is a humanity at the core of her work that is, it's mind-blowing to me. And like I say about so many people on the show, but it's totally true, she's such a genuine, sweet human being. And maybe that's part of what makes people good at finding the humanity in characters. I don't know. But maybe that's part of it, because she could not have been kinder. I feel like I made a friend through, trying to get her on the show, which took a long time for various reasons. And we finally did get her on. But just our email exchanges were so kind and human and not that formal, just like an old friend. And I feel like it's just the biggest thrill to meet she's like a childhood hero in a way, yeah, almost on the verge of tears. That's how much that this means to me that she came on the show.
This week's episode, we have Treva Silverman.
Hello, and welcome to You Are a Storyteller, Masters of the Craft, a conversational series hosted by author and filmmaker Brian McDonald. In this episode, Brian is joined by Emmy-winning screenwriter Treva Silverman, known for her writing on classic television shows such as That Girl, The Monkees, and The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Treva shares what it was like working on these groundbreaking productions and why The Mary Tyler Moore Show characters were so relatable, and the euphoria that comes from writing in a flow state.
So what I primarily have known you from is the Mary Tyler Moore Show. Although I did watch the Monkees, but when I was watching the Monkees, I couldn't read yet, so I didn't. I didn't know your name because I couldn't read yet. But by the time Mary Tyler Moore came along, I could read. So I would recognize your name. So first of all, were you always writing? I know that you were a musical prodigy, right?
Yeah.
So can we talk a little bit about that? Get a little bit of history before we talk
Sure, absolutely. I have 3 older sisters, and they were all taking piano lessons, and I was 5. I wasn't ready yet, and my mother heard somebody practicing, and she came down the stairs, and it was me, and I was playing by ear one of my sisters. Beethoven or Schubert or one of them guys.
Yeah.
So I had an interview with Juilliard, and they said the word genius, and said your daughter is a musical genius. And I remember my older sister. I was 5, so she was like 11, and she said, "When you go back to kindergarten this afternoon," she said, "don't tell them that they called you a genius. They'll be very angry at you."
Yeah.
And that was my first thing of lightning flash. I'm different. Something is different about me. Plus, and this is more in line with what you were asking, how did I end up writing and being on a Mary Tyler Show? Plus, being a musical genius, involves that I have perfect pitch, that I can play anything that I've heard, and I can play it in any key. Wow. And the word perfect to a 5-year-old, and this is what I was thinking about, Brian, the word perfect, with no effort on my own part, I think it imbued everything else I was going to do with some sort of not good enough, you have to be better, because there I was with no effort. Hello, I'm perfect, with my pitch and my being able to play in every key. And I think it sort of zoomed me on to be dissatisfied until I could get further up the scale, no pun intended.
Sure. I want to interrupt you for a second and ask you about because sometimes that kind of reach, that kind of stretch for perfection can cripple some people in terms of, you know what I mean? They can never get there. And so, I had a good friend who was a writer of note, of some reputation, and he had sort of his heyday in the 50s, writing in the 50s. And then in the 70s, he just sort of stopped. He couldn't do it. And it was because he was reaching for this perfection, and he just stopped writing. He couldn't do it anymore.
That's so tragic. He couldn't reach what he had reached earlier. And so he felt he was a failure.
I think he could do it. He just,
but he didn't.
Yeah.
Didn't believe that he could.
Yeah. I mean, he wrote the movie Sybil in the 70s.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
What a complicated, psychologically oriented mind he had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wrote that, and so he was able to do that. But he won his Emmy that year for that, and then he told me that Kermit the Frog gave him his Emmy, and he said he said that when he was accepting it, he knew he was going to quit the job he was working on because he didn't think he could do it, as he was holding the Emmy in his hand. So it really, he would write great emails and letters, and everything was a masterpiece.
When he wasn't being judged.
Yeah, when he wasn't being judged.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was just going to ask if that was ever a problem for you, or if you. Sometimes I think perfection, or the reach for perfection, is a way for people to procrastinate and not make decisions.
That's my favorite word.
Is it?
Yes. My office and my living room have never been so clean and clear and organized. You know the feeling.
I do.
When I'm supposed to be writing.
Oh yeah.
The thing that I wanted to say about your friend is that I was very close with Ed Kleban, and Ed wrote the lyrics to a chorus line. And he had so many problems after that, because here it was his first really thing. It was a chorus line,
right.
Which won every conceivable thing that you can win. And he was a kind of fragile, complicated guy to begin with. Mm-hmm. And that was in a kind of way, totally fucked him up. Totally. For some reason, it didn't screw me up. The reaching for being better thing. I don't know why, because other things, I am never ever going to try to pretend that I'm not screwed up. So this isn't the thing of I'm not screwed up. It's just in some ways, in some magical thank you heavens, that pushed me on rather than slowed me up or made me feel like a failure if I didn't reach it. From this benediction of geniusing, I then started to write music, and along with the music, I started writing songs, and it was never songs. It was pretty much that I then wanted to then compose for Broadway musicals. So I became my own lyricist. And after college, I supported myself singing and playing the piano at night, and then writing songs during the day. And
where were you singing and playing the piano? There aren't a lot of places that do that now. So where?
Oh, hey, baby. What you do before singing and playing? Every kind of bar. I would tell my parents, it's a cocktail lounge in Staten Island.
And you lived where?
I lived in New York. I grew up outside of New York, suburb, Cedarhurst.
Okay.
And went in all the time to see musicals. And I was living in New York and supporting myself singing and playing at night. And it was a lot of piano bars. A lot of bar bars, a lot of things where the Hey Baby people would come over, which was really good for me, because I hadn't come in contact with such people. Okay. So here it was a wonderful education. It was guys on the loose, and was kind of lost, and it was meeting and socializing at the places with people I wouldn't have met before, and kind of came to understand them more than it would have been just if I had just seen a movie about them or something.
Yeah.
And then I was chosen to be one of 6 people who were in a musical comedy school. It was a wonderful, wonderful era where Broadway musicals, that was the top of everything. Everybody would see them. Everybody wanted to write them. And there was this one school in New York. It was the only school that taught musical comedy. And we all went in and auditioned, and 6 of us were selected. We were given one act plays, and we were supposed to musicalize them. And then they would have a presentation every week. I found instantly that I wanted to musicalize comedies. Comedy had always been the thing. And so...
But did you know you were funny, and how did you know that? Was it a funny family? Did you have a funny family?
No.
Okay.
Oh, well, I shouldn't say that. I have 3 older sisters. They all have a good sense of humor. My mother and father were not inwardly. They didn't look inside. They weren't introspective, and they always said things that didn't give anything away. You didn't know who they were. You met you met Aunt Marcy's best friend. What was she like? As sweet as sugar. I mean, so it was always things like that. So I was about 7, and my sisters they would be 11. They're 5, 7, and 9. Math is not my strong.
Sure. Yeah.
And we were supposed to line up whenever we were being introduced. We each wore beautiful little velvet dresses with, we were told, Belgian lace. I didn't even know what Belgian was. But Belgian lace. And we're supposed to line up. I'm Lila, I'm Corinne, I'm Valerie, I'm Treva. And we would do this because of my mother saying, we should do this. And I was at my Aunt Marcy's, and we were all lined up, and it went, I'm Lila, I'm Corinne, I'm Valerie. And I thought to myself, I just can't do this. So I said, I'm hungry. And it got a big laugh. I thought, oh, yeah, that is funny. That's funny, huh? It's funny. Well, we were dragged all around the room. Say what you said before, Lila, Corinne, and Valerie, I'm hungry. And I thought to myself, this is a pretty good little rift here. And from then on, I started changing in my head what my parents would say. If they would say a cliche, I would say in my mind, oh yeah, well that's really the way it is, huh? But I wouldn't say it out loud. And I think I was developing a sense of humor. You can't make a sense of it. You can't go to school and say, okay, I want 3 points in math, 7 points,
Right.
But one of my sisters, Corinne, for some reason, because it could have been any of them, she would really respond. And so at the dinner table, instead of keeping stuff to myself, I would say it out loud. And this is my sister, Corinne. She would laugh, and my goal was to make her face red from laughing. And if her face would get red from laughing, I would, yay! And so that's how it developed. I think had I gotten no response from anybody, I don't know. It's everything in life is a what if,
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So okay, so that you took that into your. Now, did that was that just inside your family, or did you take that? Did your friends think you were funny? Did you have funny friends?
Yes.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah. I had funny friends. We all thought each other was funny. I had a humor column in high school, and then I went to University of Chicago, and I went to Bennington, And at Bennington, I would give little recitals of my songs. A lot of them were comedy songs. And then after, now we're getting into after college with the singing and playing, Hey Baby. And then when I was going to this musical comedy school, a director came to one of the presentations and he said, I'm starting children's musicals, and would you like to write the scores? And we're going to be doing it off Broadway. Yay! So yeah, of course. And he said, well, we have.
Can I ask you around what year this might have been?
Yeah, let me see. 1960.
Okay.
Yeah, it would probably be just around there.
Okay.
He said, would you like to write a score? I said, yes. And he said, we're thinking about having like 12 songs. So I said, sure. And he said, by Friday? And I said, sure. Now, today I wouldn't do it. Today I would say, that's not possible.
Sure.
I am an artist. I would never conceive. Now, today I would say, gee, I really need more time, but then it was like, sure. And so we did the first one and everything was fine. And they said, we want you to do all of ours. And I said, okay, but only if I can write the script too. So that's the first time really that I was writing scripts, which I didn't know. I didn't know that I would be able. Well, I assumed that I could because I knew that it would be better than the script that I was musicalizing.
Sure.
And then I was going out with one of my best friends, who's still one of my best friends now, John Meyer, and Johnny was a very good and is very good comedy writer, and he was writing sketches. And he said, I have an idea for a sketch. So I started writing my first sketches with him, and then gradually started writing my first sketches.
Can I ask if you had any influences? Who did you have a version like the person you are for me, right? Like, I'd like to be able to do what she does. Did you have a person like that or people like that you looked at and you went, that they know what they're doing? I got to learn that.
Robert Benchley.
Mm-hmm.
Robert Benchley and J.D. Salinger were probably my biggest influences as far as opening up that kind of attitude. There was there was nothing ever mean about either of them, about either of their attitudes towards writing. Patty Chayefsky. I think if I could name one writer, playwright, movie writer, it would be Patty Chayefsky. And I have to say Stephen Sondheim. Because Stephen Sondheim, those are my, and John Updike. Those are my major.
But as far, was there anybody, and I agree with all those things. Chayefsky's one of my people.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Oh,
so yeah, I'm surprised you haven't heard me talk about him on a show, because I will talk about him at the drop of a hat. So I will talk about him and Rod Serling, I think, at the drop of a hat. Yeah. But in terms of like sketch comedy or anything like that, was there anybody? There doesn't have to have been. I'm just curious.
See, this was way before. Oh my God. Oh, Mike and Elaine.
Oh,
Mike and Elaine. That's all. I was just about to say that was years before SNL, but no, improv. But
yeah.
I
Mike
shouldn't even
Nichols and
say
Elaine's
improv.
name.
Mike and Elaine, that was it.
Yeah, I should let people know because there's a lot of younger people who don't know.
Yes.
Mike Nichols and Elaine May were amazing.
I was very, I was friendly and still am friends with Marlo Thomas. And Marlo is close friends with Elaine. And so I had a time where we were just 3 or 4 or 5 of us. And I was able to tell Elaine everything that was in my heart.
Sure.
What it influenced, but that I said, which is true, and I know that you know this. She influenced everybody who was influenceable.
Yes, she did. Yeah.
That her words, I said to her that her words and attitudes are in my brain, imprinted.
Mm-hmm.
You found that too, didn't you? So much.
Oh yeah, yeah. But you know, they were by the time I came along or was sort of aware, they were not doing their work together. So I had to learn about them later. I learned about them later. And Mike Nichols was a director. That's what I knew. I didn't know this past. It was just before I was sort of conscious that was happening. Yeah, because I was born in '65.
You were born in '65. Oh, right. So that at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. So I missed them when they.
So you're exactly sort of 30 years younger than me. So I was very lucky to be born when I was born, because I saw the changeover from the 50s brain to the late 60s and 70s brain. And you were just growing up, and you were just watching the Monkees.
I was watching the Monkees, and you were writing for the book. And I also I went, for some reason, I don't know why, when I was 5, the Mary Tyler Moore Show was my favorite show. So
really?
It came on when I was 5, started when I was 5.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
1970. Yeah.
Yeah. It started when I was 5, and so did Sesame Street. So,
Brian, tell me what you remember of being
the show?
5 and watching it. Was it a thing where it made you feel good, or because they were nice people? How can you be 5 and I'm trying to figure out?
I can't figure it out either. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think, here's what I think. I think that there are things that kids, of course, they don't understand, right? They don't know, they don't get certain references. They don't know how complicated it can be to be an adult, right? But I do think what kids do understand is relationships, our relationships. And so they know, oh, that person's not the smart person, and that person's slimy, and that person's nice, and that person's funny. And that, I think I understood it at that level to begin with.
Yeah.
I understood the purpose of all the characters, if that makes sense. Like, Lou is the boss, and that's his job. Even though I don't even know if I knew what a boss was, but I understood those relationships, and I think that's what kids first sort of can latch on to. And so I think they were so clearly defined, those characters, that it was easy to understand, maybe in very broad terms, but it was easy to understand the show. And then, when the show went off the air, I was 12. That's a big chunk of a person's life. You change a lot in that, from 5 to 12.
The most.
I remember I was devastated. I mean, everybody has that story who was a fan. I was devastated. It was like somebody had died. Like I still have a hard time watching the last episode of that show.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I still do. I won't, if I get all the way to the end, I sometimes I won't watch that last one. It's too much.
Really? So it was that much of like an abandonment of friends.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they had been with me my whole life. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We see your whole life
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So,
And Ted was the silly one. You knew that Ted was the silly one.
right.
Yeah.
You know what I
And-
mean? So I think that's
Yeah.
what I saw. And then I don't know if you've heard me talk about it, but we're going to move back and forth a lot chronologically,
Yeah.
I think. But that's okay. But I used to probably Mary Tyler more than any other show, although I did it with other shows too. I would audio record the shows before there was videotape. I would audio record the shows and then listen to them to figure out how they worked, to figure out how you set up a joke and how you paid it off. And I was doing that. I know I was doing it at 12. I was probably doing it earlier, 10, something like that. And I learned a lot.
So at 10 or so, you wanted to see how the you were deconstructing it.
I was deconstructing it. I would do it with Mary Tyler Moore. I would do it with the Bob Newhart show. I think I first did it because I wanted to see the shows again somehow. Like I liked it and I wanted to, didn't want it to be over. Again. But then when I would hear it again, I started to notice patterns. And then I started looking for those patterns. So that's it's a foundational thing for me.
A foundational thing. Wow.
Yeah. I'm not sure I'm alone. I'm not sure I'm alone at all. I mean, hear Oprah talk about the show. Like, that show meant everything to Oprah. There was something about it, particularly at that time. There weren't that many Black people on TV, right? Like, it was a thing, like, in the house. Oh, my God, so-and-so's on TV, and we would all, like, James Brown is on TV. Flip Wilson was on, and there were a few things, but there weren't that many. And I was trying to figure out why I could latch on to the Mary Tyler Moore show, which was so different from my own life. But I think there was something very human at its core. It was different from Oprah's life. It was different from my life. But there was something so human at the core of it that it didn't matter that they lived differently and lived in a city you'd never been to and had a life that was foreign in so many ways. It didn't feel like that at all.
I guess there was a kindness to it. The butt of the jokes in the newsroom was Ted, but Ted never got hurt.
Right.
He never got hurt, and his stupid things that he would say didn't hurt anybody.
Right.
So it was minus so many sitcoms then and now and every time. There's superior things.
Yeah.
There's I'm superior to you, therefore I can hurt you by saying something. Or there's meanness, and there really wasn't meanness in those shows.
No, I don't think so. And in fact, they would come to Ted's defense sometimes. They would.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, he was the butt of a lot of jokes and he annoyed people, but in the end, they would stick up for him. They would, let him keep his job when he probably shouldn't have. And,
they would stick up. They would stick up for him because they knew that he meant no harm.
Mm-hmm.
It was like if you pass a crib that there's a baby. Well, if you pass a little baby and the little baby kicks, and the baby didn't mean any harm.
Right.
Ted didn't know better, so everybody knew at his core he wasn't a mean person.
Right.
And it was Georgette was able to see the sweetness under all this stupid stuff.
Yeah. And Georgette, for the people who don't know the show, I hope everybody watches the show after this show. But Georgette, well, first was Ted's girlfriend, but then married him on the show. She did see, she would get annoyed with him and upset with him, but I think saw his humanity. And he had a sort of vulnerability. He had a vulnerability. In a lot of the ways that Barney Fife did on the Andy Griffith Show, which is a lot of their personality comes out of their insecurities and them covering up their insecurities.
Yeah.
And I think that's human enough, right? That we can see the hurt person underneath.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The personality comes from the insecurities, like life. With Ted, he was elevated by Georgette's appreciation of him and her love for him. She as a character and as a person, Georgia Engel, she was so pure that she could see through to in kind of a pure way.
Sure.
She was one of a kind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go back to your writing sketches for the first time, really, right?
Yes. Writing sketches for the first time. And I was getting them done, and I was getting them done very, very well. I mean, they were being done very well. And there was a place in New York before you were born. Oh.
I'm always saying that to people, so it's nice to hear.
Before you were born, it was called Upstairs at the Downstairs. And it was a sort of equivalent of where you would go to get sketch writers of Saturday Night Live. Oh, look, there's a sketch writer. And everybody who was there would go there. Jacqueline Onassis was there, and Truman Capote went there, and Mike Nichols went there. I mean, went there to see, well, what's the latest sketches. And Carol Burnett's producer went there, and he saw my sketches, and he asked about me to the maitre d'. And the maitre d', he said that he wanted to bring Carol in to see the sketches. Now, this was after she had done Gary Moore.
Okay.
And she was starting a new show called The Entertainers.
All right. So I'm going to explain Gary Moore. So Gary Moore's show, I mostly know Gary Moore from I've Got a Secret, but I know he had the other show, right?
Yeah.
Right. So Gary Moore was like a host more than I would say a comic. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And his show, what was his show like? What was his?
It was sketches and songs. It was a variety show. It was on for a while, and Carol Burnett came up in the ranks, and she was wonderful enough that they wanted to give her own show, but she felt she was too early for her. Mm-hmm. So she wanted to have a group. So it was called The Entertainers, and it was Carol and John Davidson, and Dom DeLuise and Bob Newhart, who was one of your favorites, and they were looking for people to hire. So the maitre d' called me, and he said, Carol Burnett is coming to see your sketches on Thursday night, the early show, the 8:30 show. Just want to let you know. So I was getting paid $10 a sketch, and I had 5 sketches in, so it was $50 And so I thought, well, I can't think of that right now. So I called everybody who hadn't gone to the show, all my friends. Hey, you haven't seen the show. Let me treat you. Oh, that's so sweet of you. We can come Saturday. Well, how about coming Thursday at 8:30? Well, I don't know. Well, yeah. So I got a whole group that were all set to come at 8:30. So at 5:30, I got a call from the maitre d'. This sounds like a comedy setup, but Carol can't make the 8:30 show. She's coming to the 11:30 show. So all my friends were there at the 8:30 show. And it turned out it was good that she wasn't there, because there they were being treated, they were having their drinks paid for, and it became sort of obnoxious. They would laugh before anything funny happened.
Sure.
But then the 11:30 show, she came, and she was wonderful. She was wonderful. And she hugged me. And I got hired for that as a sketch writer. So
that's cool. She was cool that way, from everything I hear. Like with Vicki Lawrence, Vicki Lawrence got her job on the show. Do you know that story?
No, tell me.
So Vicki Lawrence was a fan of Carol Burnett, and she wrote her a letter. Vicki Lawrence wrote Carol a letter saying, "Hey, I'm in this high school play. Will you come see it?" And Carol went to see it.
Huh.
And thought she was funny and hired her for the show. That's amazing.
That is Carol.
Yeah.
I was so lucky and almost spoiled by how dear she was and how she respected writers. The very first time I was going to have a sketch on the show, she invited me to come watch the rehearsal. It was only her, playing Little Match Girl. I had her, and so she went through it, and then the director said, "Carol, there's a certain line, I'm not sure." And Carol said this phrase, "Well, let's ask the author." The word author, and Brian, you know what television can be, writers being dispensable. I mean,
yeah.
Author, that word, that's Carol. She was wonderful, and she started me in television, and then from television. Wait a minute, I'm skipping some. Oh, I know. Before that happened, and I was writing sketches and songs. I was at that point still singing and playing the piano, and I was at a place that was in the Broadway district, and my friend John, who I mentioned before, John Meyer, and we were playing the piano, and there was a guy there around the piano who said, "Oh, do you know this? Do you know that?" And so afterwards, I started to talk to him, and his name was something like Jim Brooks. And that's how I met Jim. And we talked about Fitzgerald and Salinger, and we exchanged numbers.
I have to explain to our younger people who are listening or watching this show that Jim Brooks is James L. Brooks. James L. Brooks was the co-creator of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, and has gone on. He's done all kinds of stuff. So The Simpsons, he produces. He wrote and directed Terms of Endearment and Broadcast News and As Good as It Gets. Just amazing. So
just amazing.
Yeah.
Yes, he co-created with Alan Burns the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And Jim at that point was a page at NBC, and I was a singing pianist. And what we wanted to be when we grew up were comedy writers. So we kept in touch. And this is something that Jim doesn't know. And maybe after all these decades, it's okay for him to know it. It was back in a time when they didn't have the push button telephones. Now you can have 3 lines, 4 lines. So I had 2 separate telephones, about to have a birthday, and it was going to be at my little apartment in New York. And a friend of mine had said, I will cook a birthday meal for you, but we can't fit more than 12 people because you have a little table and we can't. So, okay, I can only invite 12 people. So I'm on the phone with Jim, and we're talking about what we want to do and what we want to write. And the other phone rang. I said, oh, Jim, hold on just a second. And I pick up the other phone and I say, oh, John, listen, this was pre-email, if you can imagine such a time. I said, John, I have to tell you, I'm having a birthday party. I can only have 12 people, and it's on my birthday. Can you come? And he says, great. And I hang up. I go, oh, God, I'm on the phone with Jim, who I had met like 3 weeks before. So I go back, and being my mother's good girl, I said, oh, Jim, I forgot to tell you I'm having a birthday party. Can you come? So Jim, later on in our relationship, when we were very, very close and working together, he said, I have to tell you something I've never told you. He said, when I met you, I thought we would really be friends and it was great and we'd have a great relationship. But I didn't realize that you considered me one of your 12 best friends. And I thought to myself, Jim said, I think maybe she knows something about us and he said, I then realized that we were going to have a really serious friendship. Jim has gone on to be one of the best and most admired, along with Alan. So that's how I met Jim. And so now I'm writing The Entertainers and working with Joan Rivers as her director, if you can understand. Wow. It was such a time of starting. It was much easier then than it is now. My friends who have daughters or sons who are just starting out, they say how impossibly hard it is. I don't know. Not that it was easier. I shouldn't say easier. I don't know, but there was such an incredible group of people that I started out with.
I had that too. And
you did?
Yeah, like the people I started out with, Judd Apatow and Paul.
Judd Apatow
and Paul Feig.
Oh, Paul Feig. Oh, I always thought it was Feig. Paul Feig.
Oh, well, yeah, it's Feig. Although he has been told that he pronounces it wrong, but that's the way his family pronounces it. Paul, Steve Higgins, who is Jimmy Fallon's sidekick now on The Tonight Show, but he also produces Saturday Night Live. Who else in that group? A lot of people in that. Jim Ools, who wrote the screenplay for Fight Club, was in that group. Who else was? There were a lot of us. There were a lot of us, and there were some satellite people that went on to some things that were not part of the main group. But where
were you living then?
Los Angeles.
Oh, you were.
Yeah. I lived there through my 20s, more or less.
So tell me the years so I can kind of...
I was there in 86. I moved there, June of 86, and left in 93.
Was that Freaks and Geeks time?
No, Freaks and Geeks was after I left. All I knew about Freaks and Geeks is I talked to Paul, and he said, I sold the show to NBC, and he told me a little bit about it, that it was a high school show, but I didn't know much about it. But a lot of that group worked on that show too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the actors that they discovered who are now household.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on your household, but household names. So many of the people that they discovered are now not just actors, but writers and directors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They discovered a lot of really, it was a talented group.
To say the least. Yeah.
Yeah. And I knew Paul from stand-up, and Paul, the Freaks and Geeks. I know it was Judd and Paul, but it was really Paul's sort of basic idea, basic concept. And when he was a stand-up, Paul would do these things from his childhood, these little stories from his childhood that were just amazing. And he would imitate teachers, and it was still funny. Even though you didn't know the teacher, it was funny. He found a way to make it work for everybody. He had this shop teacher character he would do, and all the comics would stand in the back of the club and say, shopkeeper, shopkeeper, when he would have to do it. And he did.
Were you a stand-up?
Yeah, but that is, I was not good at it. So
why do you think?
Why wasn't I good? I wasn't terrible. I just wasn't good at it. And I bet it wouldn't look good at all now. I know exactly why I wasn't better at it. First of all, I was around people who had been doing it a little longer. And so I was comparing myself to them. So that was one thing. The other thing was, I didn't move to LA to be a stand-up. I moved to LA to be a writer and a director. But it was the 80s and everybody was doing stand-up. And I was writing jokes for a friend of mine. And I would write jokes he couldn't quite tell. And he started introducing me as a comic to people. Oh, this is Brian. He's a comic. And I wasn't a comic. And I thought I'd try it. And I had horrible stage fright back then. Terrible stage fright. But I did it. And I thought I was going to die. And I didn't die. And after that, I realized that, well, it can't get any harder than that. So I'll just keep doing it. And then I did it, and I was doing it for fun. And then, I don't know, I hadn't done it very long before somebody said, hey, we have a gig in Arizona. We want to fly you to Arizona to do this gig. And okay. So I did that, and I kept getting paid for it. But I wasn't good. Again, I wasn't terrible. In fact, I remember I was on stage once, and these people were just smiling at me, but not laughing. And I said to them, you don't think I'm funny at all, but you like me, right? And they were like, yeah, that's exactly it. And
wonderful that you said that.
Yeah. Because I was trying to figure out how to turn that into comedy. It's like, okay, people like me when I'm on stage. How do I turn that into something else? But what I realized I was doing, because I was still trying to make it as a writer and director, there weren't a lot of people who looked like me in those positions. And any movie set I was ever on, or any set I was on, I was the only person of color on those sets.
Jesus.
And so what I was doing was trying to make myself inconspicuous, trying to not stand out as being the person who's different, trying to fit in. And so when I took that into stand-up, I wasn't being honest about what my experiences were. I couldn't get to a place of honesty. And so that stopped me from being better at stand-up. You know, I started off being silly because I sort of wanted to ignore race. But as it became more of a factor in my life and in my career trajectory, I wanted to talk about those things a little bit more, but felt like I couldn't because I thought it might hurt my other thing. So it was complicated. But I think when I look back, I think that's what was holding me back. And I remember I saw Chris Rock at the Comedy Store one night, and Chris Rock wasn't famous. He was sort of famous among the people in the know, but I mean, he hadn't broken out.
Yeah.
And people were like, "Oh, Chris Rock's going to be on." I didn't know who he was, you know. And I'm standing there, and in the belly room, that middle room there, I'm standing there, and Chris Rock comes on, and it was like nothing you'd ever seen. Like, it was, everybody knew. It's like, well, that's a star. You know, when you see a star early on, you go, that person's a star. It was clear. And it was clear that I had no business doing what that guy was doing. But he was honest in a way I just didn't know how to be on stage. But I learned a lot about stagecraft. I learned, a lot, you know, I do a lot of, well, in days of when there's no COVID, I do a lot of public speaking, and I couldn't have done that without stand-up because once you stood on a stage by yourself and tried to make people laugh for half an hour, there's not much harder than that. And so if I go on a stage and talk about something I know and I'm not expected to get any laughs, it's easy. It's a piece of cake. So I learned how to take the stage. I learned that actually from Paul Feig. I would watch him. He was really good at taking the stage. And I would watch him like, how does he do that? I would watch Paul. There would be 16 comics up a night. And people would get tired. And Paul
would what?
They would get tired. Right? Seeing comic after comic, like 5 minutes at a time, comic after comic after comic, they'd get tired.
Yeah.
And Paul would walk on stage and everybody would sit up. And they sat up and they knew he was going to be funny. And I was like, how is he doing that? He hasn't even said anything. And so I just watched him and I figured out how to do that.
You did figure that out?
Yeah, I figured that out. But that's part of the stagecraft that I use now. And that's one of the things I actually like about this whole business is how much you can learn from other people and how generous people can be with the things that they know. So I learned a lot from just asking older performers, how do you do that? And what's this? And how do you take the stage? And how do you, and there are things I don't know where I learned them, but I must have learned them someplace. Like, I always, if I'm going to do any public speaking, I will go to the venue ahead of time and I will, I'll sit on the stage all by myself, because I want the stage to be familiar to me. And I want the stage to be my living room. I want to take control of that stage. I'm familiar with it. So I go there and I'm just comfortable being there. And then I'll go into the audience and I'll sit in sort of each section for a while to see what people are seeing. And then. Oh,
so this is what I would look like from this location.
Yeah. So, these people it's going to be hard for them to see. So I got to make sure that I, stand here or stand there, or make sure I address them. Walking on and off the stage is also very important because you can trip and that'll throw you off. So I always know how to get on and off the stage. Things like that I must have picked up. But Paul would, what I've noticed is that people will take a stage and ask for permission to be there in their posture, in their like, okay, I'm going to take the stage now and I hope you think I'm funny. And they're timid. But Paul would take the stage like he knew I'm going to be funny. And people somehow they felt that and they were like, this guy's going to be funny. And they would sit up. And I learned how to do that. I just didn't learn how to be funny. Yeah.
What's wrong with this picture?
I was mediocre, but I was as good as I needed to be to learn what I needed to learn. And
what a beautiful, that should be hanging over everybody's mirror. That's wonderful. So you learned all the things that you needed to learn. I was just going to ask, when you were doing stand-up and you said you were trying to avoid anything that would make you conspicuous, so you avoided anything of color, concerning color.
Yeah.
So then you would deliberately do things, say things that you thought that every kind of audience could relate to. That you didn't.
Yeah, I just, I was just silly. I was a big Steve Martin fan, and I was just silly, and then I wanted to not be silly, and I wasn't sure how to break out of that.
You were silly.
Yeah, I just had silly jokes that were stupid, and I didn't know how to break out of it. I didn't know how to. I didn't know how to do what the other people were doing. I knew what I knew, and that was, how to write a story and, all of those things. So I didn't feel like I didn't have any talent. I just felt like it wasn't necessarily here in that arena. But I learned a ton. So I actually think that on some level, the reason I was doing it was to learn more about communication. What do people need to know for a joke to work? You need to set it up this way and pay it off that way. You know, I was able to write them. I was writing them for other people, but I was not the best at it. I was better at writing character stuff, better at writing things in a script than I was straight up just joke writing. But I knew some really great joke writers who have a really hard time writing scripts. So they can write a joke though, but they have a really hard time writing scripts, which is one of the things I want to talk to you about, because you can do both those things, right? You can write jokes, but you can write a script, you can write a story. And I'm just curious about.
Oh no, I can't write. I can't write jokes. Well, I could, with my arm behind my back. Yeah, I could write a joke, but I wouldn't. But I would be less than mediocre at it. I can only write something. I can only write something that's I can only write something that's truly funny if it's coming out of a character in a certain situation. I'm writing a script now, a screenplay, and everything is about the. Oh God, this is going to come off as so narcissistic, but everything is about the human condition. Mm-hmm. It's what's happening to him at that exact moment. Mm-hmm. What is he trying to cover up with his girlfriend? What is he afraid she's going to find out? And that's what would make his line or his reaction funny. But I was once working on the Dean Martin show, which was ill-fated. And of all things, I and another writer were given the responsibility to write for Bob Hope.
Okay.
As he was going to be a guest. Now, from a million miles away in another galaxy, you could be looking down and saying, "That's a mistake." That is,
right, because he was one-liners. He was like, yeah.
He was one-liners. That he was a 50s. Take my wife, please. He was the 50s. Anybody could be saying it, and if they say it right, it will be funny.
Right.
And I don't know from that, And I wrote two pages, and thank God the other writer was so gifted that they used all of his, and they used one line of mine, which is about the ratio of how good I am with two pages and one barely made it. So it's really funny things that would occur in a particular situation with. Okay, I created Georgette, the character of.
Oh, you created the character Georgette.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, which I so loved that whole thing.
Let me just say this, by the way, about how good you are, and what people
You're not boring me.
Now you are just talking about you creating Georgette, and you've done a lot of things, but you won an Emmy, and you're I don't know how many Emmys you've won, but I know you have one. And you were the first woman writing by herself to win an Emmy, right?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's an amazing thing to have done. So I just think people ought to know that's who they're listening to right now. So you created Georgette. You were saying, I'm sorry.
Oh, you can digress like that with my blessings. I wrote Georgette because Alan Burns, who recently.
So Alan Burns, we actually put this aside. You were going to come on another date, and Alan Burns passed away, and so we decided to.
I was too. I didn't want to do anything except just think about Alan.
No, I get that. That makes perfect sense. So,
and you were so dear.
Oh,
you and Hannah were lovely to understand that. Thank you.
Oh no, of course. But Alan Burns was the co-creator of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, as we said earlier. And do you want to talk about what kind of a person he was and what kind of a talent he was? Just as long as we're here.
Absolutely. No matter, even if your watchers and listeners don't know people in show business, you all certainly know enough to know that it's pretty crazy and pretty screwed up, and there's a lot of people who start out as decent people who want to get someplace, and then they turn into not so good. Alan was a total rarity in that he was decent and brilliant and was the same feet on the ground person at the beginning as he was when he created one of the most successful, wonderful shows along with Jim. He had a side to him. You were saying the word silly. He had a side to him that was silly, wonderful silly. And at Mary's memorial, which was a very small, very small invited group, Jim, as Alan's partner, said to Alan when Alan was there at one of the tables, he said that the niceness of the Mary Tyler Moore Show came from that guy there, and he pointed to Alan. And Alan's niceness was, I don't think he had an enemy in the world. Mm-hmm. I don't think that anybody who met him and worked with him didn't feel, how this sweet, lovely, generous guy get into this crazy business. I remember, I mean, this is just one of billions of examples, but I had written a show about Mary being solicited by Phyllis, her next door neighbor and her landlord, to tell her daughter Bess the facts of life.
It's a good episode, by the way.
And I loved writing that episode. And there was a thing where Rhoda comes in, and of course, it was a little fearful that Rhoda was going to tell little Bess too much.
Sure.
And so we were going over that scene, and Alan added the line about Rhoda saying she got so confused that she thought the babies were made by swimming upstream the Colorado
River.
The
salmon, yeah, that's right.
The salmon, yeah, that's right, yeah. Salmon, yeah.
Yeah.
And so so that was Alan's line. So if somebody's name was attached, you wrote practically everything.
Sure. Practically
everything, if you were one of the standard writers. But there were times when the group would put in lines, and audiences didn't know that. And so some people from the audience came backstage, and Alan was standing near me. They said, "Oh, wonderful show, Miss Silverman, just wonderful. But I have to tell you that salmon swimming upstream, just brilliant." And I said, "Oh, thank you so much for liking the show. I loved writing it, but I have to tell you that it was Alan Burns' line." And this happened like several times in a row because the line was so great. People would come up and Alan came up to me and he said, "Treva, please don't say about that I wrote it." He said, "You only embarrass them. They feel silly because they attributed it to you, and it doesn't do anybody any good. And you wrote the whole show, so just say thank you." Now,
Wow.
how many people in any business, not just the show business,
Right.
but accountants, you caught that mistake.
Right.
Oh, it was Ed who caught the mistake. Don't tell people, in every business you can relate to that. And that's who Alan was. And I loved him, and I love his relationship. His relationship with his wife was so honest and steady and wonderful. And I will always, always miss him. And I learned every time I would work with him, I would learn something. You were talking about learning when you were talking about you were mediocre as a stand-up, but how much you learned. So much was learning from Alan. And everybody who was on any of his shows, he was responsible for the Lou Grant show that followed Mary. Yeah.
The Lou Grant show a lot, by the way. The Lou Grant show, because Lou was a character, he was the boss on the Mary Tyler Moore show, and there were several spinoffs of Mary, but Lou Grant was, I think, the only ever drama that spun off of a comedy show.
Yes.
So
well, I've heard it said that it was the only one, and I totally believe it, because somebody becomes well known for being in a comedy. They all carried it off. They carried it off beautifully.
They did. It was an amazing spinoff. I don't think anybody's done that before or since, and it was amazing to see. And that says something about Alan Burns, that he was able to see that and do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I met Valerie Harper once.
Oh.
She was very sweet. She was very sweet. And like everybody, I was a huge Rhoda fan, right? And she couldn't have been sweeter. And what's great for me is getting to meet and talk to people like you, and then hearing you say things about Alan Burns, making him a real three-dimensional human being, and not a name on the screen, is an amazing gift to me. So because you were all my teachers, so it's great to know more about those people, and I appreciate you talking about Alan Burns that way, because I know it's not easy to talk about those things when it's so fresh. So I appreciate you doing that.
I wanted to ask you, so when you were with Valerie,
Mm-hmm.
you could see and you could sense who she was.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. She. I was in Austin at the film festival in Austin, and I was on a few panels, but this is like I had a free period, and a friend of mine was emceeing a filmmaker. He was talking to a filmmaker, and so. But anyway, so I was there for that, and Valerie Harper was in the audience, and I think I was the first person to notice that it was Valerie Harper, and so I was like, okay, when this is over, I gotta get a picture. So but by the time it was over, I think everybody figured it out. She was laughing very hard. She was not inconspicuous. So by the time it was over, everybody knew, oh, Valerie Harper's here. And so I was close to her, but by the time I got in line, it was this long line to get a picture. And she was gracious and let everybody, take a picture with her. And she would check the pictures. Let me look at it. Is that okay?
Really?
Do you like that one? Do you like that one? Let's get another one. It's a little blurry. And she did that for everybody. It was amazing. It was really cool to see. And I talked to her just a little bit. In fact, Paul Feig was at that thing, and he talked to her a little bit. I don't know if they had met before. It was a big deal for me to meet her, and for her to be so sweet, just unbelievably sweet.
Watching her say to the person, "Oh, it's blurry," then you got to know Valerie. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
I could go on, but I think she was amazing. That character, she brought that character to life, Rhoda, so well. It's hard to believe that that's nothing like who she was in terms of, she wasn't a New York person, all those things that I still believe is a real person. Like when I watch a show, I'm like, Rhoda's a person and Valerie Harper's a person, and they're not the same person, I don't know if that was true of Mary. I feel like Mary's character is more like Mary in some ways, but I don't know. I don't know those people, so I don't know.
Mary was quite close to Mary Richards, the Mary Richards character, when she was on the show.
Okay.
During the show, she and her husband split up.
Oh.
And Mary Tyler Moore moved to New York, and everything kind of changed for her. I had moved back to New York in the 80s, and she was there in the 80s, and we got our friendship going a whole different other way. She was dating. She hadn't been dating in years and years and years because she had 2 marriages. Mm-hmm. And she was in therapy, which she was very proud of. And she became less Mary Richards and more Rhoda Morgenstern.
Oh, did she?
Yes, in her own way.
So I want to get, so you were doing other television shows. Did you work on Room 222? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So Room 222, as a matter of fact, is one of the first things I ever remember seeing on television.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course.
And that theme song has been in my head for 50 plus years. It's just in there. Yeah. And so for whatever reason, I don't think I understood that show at all, but I watched it.
How old were you?
So I was like 3 when it started or something, so yeah, I remember watching. It's like I remember that show and Mannix. Those are my early memories of television are Mannix and Room 222. So you wrote on that show, am I right?
Yeah, I wrote 2 episodes, and it was me. I was working with Jim. Jim Brooks created it, and
it was a high school show.
It was a high school show, and the two leads were people of color, which was why your parents planted you in front of
right. Yeah.
And then the second episode that I wrote for them, Jim had called Alan in to first was, I think, he as co-producer, and then Alan started writing a lot of the shows, and so I had the opportunity to work with Jim as not just to be a friend, and the opportunity to work with Alan, so that when I got called by Jim after Mary Tyler Moore show got the go-ahead, we had already worked together. We knew that we understood each other, that we were on the same page. I hate that expression. But we were on the same wave. Yeah.
So can I ask you, I never got to be on staff at a show. I always wanted to be, but I never was able to do that. And one of the reasons I wanted to do it was that learning from each other thing that happens.
Yes.
Like, oh, that's great. I got to remember how to do that. I like being in it. That's part of the reason for this show, even, that I can talk to people and learn from them. It's really an excuse for me to talk to people I want to talk to and learn from them. Right. So
You hide it very well.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Like, this is completely a selfish endeavor for me.
No, you act as if, no, you're wonderful with, with everything. With everything.
So, but what is it that those two guys had that made them so good at their jobs, and how were they able to bring other people along? You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yes. No, I know what you mean. Well, there's a word that's going around politically, and it's applicable here. Empathy.
Okay.
Empathy is what made the Mary Tyler Moore show. Being able to get into the character's mind and what the character would be feeling and how the character would be reacting. People will say the word conduit, being a conduit for who the character is. When you really understand the character, you can sort of channel the character. And that's what they did, creating the show. That's what the writers were able to do. For instance, I wrote a show about Lou Grant's wife leaving him.
Oh, yeah.
And we were casting the wife, and it was the fourth year, I think. And in all the 4 years, he had talked about his wife,
right?
But we had never met her, and so we had to sort of work backwards, which is we had to cast somebody who filled the description of how he talked about her, but we had never seen her. And so different actresses came in, and a wonderful actress came in, and she has a bunch of speeches, and which were the audition piece. And she read one of my speeches, and we were kind of sort of almost teary by her portrayal. And I said, after I said, I think she's wonderful. And Jim said, no, she would be wrong because she's very fragile looking, and she's small. She was about 5'1", very slender, and you have the idea. He said you have the idea that Lou could make her do anything he wanted to.
Oh, right. Yeah, Lou was a big, imposing,
took center stage. And then when the actress who ended up taking the part, she was taller. She had a nice figure, but it was not a fragile work. It was not a slim, fragile. And I always think that the best kind of education is working with people as good as you are or better than you are.
Oh, yeah.
Because just here, that one thing stands out in my mind with casting. It's not just how good can she do the scene, because she was really wonderful, but how will it appear?
Right.
Yeah. And I think that everybody who's a good writer, maybe they can't read out loud in a reading, but they can act it in their mind.
Mm-hmm.
They have to be able to act it in their mind so that they know that's the way they perceive it.
Yeah.
And that's the way they see the character. And everybody who wrote regularly for the show must have had that. There's a thing that I read about and I hear about acting classes, which this to me is so fucking ridiculous. The first thing that you might know this, the first thing that acting classes say is, take away all the take away all the underlines in the script.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So they take away all the underlines. My response is, I would not have written the line that way without the underline.
Yeah.
So you're taking away Carol Burnett's author. You're taking away the writer's. It's the same as writing a word.
Right.
The underline, and I for one can't understand how acting teachers don't get that. I'll be watching even a terrific movie, and every now and then. Not a great actor, but a pretty good actor will himself or herself underline the wrong word.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I didn't mean that. Instead of, well, I didn't mean that.
Right.
Or I didn't mean that.
Right.
I mean, it's three different life choices.
Mm-hmm.
It's three different choices. I don't have to build it up. Yeah. And so it kills me that acting. How did this come up? Anyway, empathy. That's the word.
You know, I was friends with August Wilson, and he used to intimidate actors all the time, because when he would go see a rehearsal, he would catch every little comma that they missed, everything, and he would tell them. Like, he would come up afterwards and like, the word is "and" there, not like. So but that's different because it's theater and they respect the writer in a different way.
Yeah, a much different way.
Yeah.
Where you can a much different way. It's the only medium of television and movies and theater. Theater is the only medium where the writer has permission to
not change stuff, right? Like the writer can be like, no, that's it, that's the line, right? Like,
well, you can. The writer can close down a performance. Yeah. If they wish, if the actor is, I don't know why, it's a simple concept. I'm blubbering over it, but
yeah.
The writer is the main person.
Yeah. Well, it's their thing, right. You know? Yeah. So, was there anything like? Because here's the thing: it's one thing to be able to write funny characters. It's one thing to be able. That's one skill, but the stories were good. Like, one of my favorites is the Rhoda the Beautiful one. Rhoda. I love that episode where she enters a beauty contest. There's so much honesty in it. And one of the things I appreciate about the character of Rhoda is that she makes jokes, but she's serious about everything she jokes about. So, you know what I mean? So
that's very profound what you just said. Yes.
That's who she is, right? She doesn't just make jokes. If she makes jokes about her weight, it's because that's the way she feels. If she makes jokes about her looks, it's because that's how she feels. Or the fact that she's not married, because that's how she feels. It's not just to be funny. She's dead serious about the things she jokes about. And I like that about the character, because a lot of sitcoms are everybody's clever and everybody's got jokes, right? There are only a few people with actual jokes on the show. Mary, Murray, later Sue Ann had jokes, but most of the stuff was just completely out of character, and the people who made jokes completely out of character. Rhoda's the best example, I think. When Rhoda makes a joke, it's kind of not a joke to her.
She's saying how she feels, and she puts it in a joke fashion.
Yeah, but she's not joking, really, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
One of the things that happens in that show that I love is that she's always putting herself down, and Mary calls her on that. And it's really great because it's true. That's who she is. She's down on herself. And that was true of the character before that episode. So it was a nice observation to sometimes on something that's not as well written, a character has a problem for that episode that they've never had before. But but that's who she was the whole time. Yeah. She's like that. And it was a great place to go for a story, especially the beauty contest. And it was just a great place to go for a story. And the story itself works. And I'm fascinated by, I've known a lot of people who write jokes and story doesn't come naturally to them. Did story come naturally to you, or was that guided by Alan Burns and Jim Brooks, or how did that happen? Why was everybody so good at writing this show?
Story does not come naturally to me.
Okay.
And I don't know why, but it doesn't. In this particular story, they said to me, it was after the hiatus, and they said, Treva, Valerie has lost 20 pounds, and we want to make a show about how she feels about it. So they already had that. And we would get together, the three of us, and we would hammer out the show. We would hammer out the beats of the show. But I would be negligent if I didn't say they would hammer it out and I would adjust things or add things.
Okay.
But alone in the room, I was not alone in a room and making that the beats of the show. They were responsible for that. At the end, when there's the big major, where there's a big major change, I would test out the tape, and then we would tape. Then I would tape what we said. The tape ran out before the last scene. I was going crazy when I was writing it. I thought, well, what did we say that last scene? I mean, I knew that she had won, but that's all I knew. And so the last scene was entirely my own doing, which was every beat was on the tape. But the last scene where she's ashamed, she's embarrassed to say that she won.
Yeah.
Because she's been living with that version of Rhoda, the overweight, insecure, self-deprecating. She's been living with that all her life. She didn't know the script to the new, to her new self. So she gave up on she gave up on telling the truth because she thought she wasn't worthy because she's still that person. And she said she hadn't won, but she came in second, and that's okay. It's perfectly okay. It's where she should be, type of thing. And then she gains confidence in that moment. And that's when she says, that's when she describes that she did win.
Right.
And Brian, I can tell you, I was crying when I wrote that.
Yeah.
When I wrote that final turn. Yeah. When I wrote that final turn and I'm writing it and tears. And I thought, this has got to be right.
Now, when you wrote it, it's a really great episode. But I want to, when you wrote it, there's a story that's similar. And I think it was Harvey Bullock. I'm not sure. I think it was him. He was writing for the Andy Griffith Show.
Okay.
And there's a line in an episode where he said, I didn't know what this last line was going to be. I didn't know.
Yeah.
And he's typing and he gets to the end where he knew what was going to happen. And then he said, I don't know where it came from, but my fingers kept typing. And he typed this amazing last line for that episode. And he says, I don't know where it came from. And I think that sometimes when you are in the groove, it's almost like you're taking dictation. Did you feel that? Or did you feel like, no, this was a complete creation that took everything for me to do? Or were you just in the groove? Were you in the zone?
I was totally in the zone. And my unconscious was right there.
Yeah.
And my unconscious was writing it.
Yeah.
On my behalf and on Valerie's behalf and on Rhoda's behalf. That's all I can really. Yeah.
No, I know what you're talking about. It's a really amazing sensation, and it doesn't happen as much as you'd like. But when it happens, it's an amazing thing because you know it's working.
When it happens,
it's not you. You know what I mean?
When it happens, I always think I have a lot of money in the bank. I always think that everything is going to be okay. I always think that the Democrats are going to take over. I always think that the world is going to be absolutely perfect. It's the most wonderful feeling that you can ever have, which is I'm a writer and I'm creating something that I love.
Right.
It doesn't get better than that.
No, it's an amazing feeling. Yeah. And you know it, and I think you can appreciate it because on some level it feels like it wasn't you. It's like you're appreciating just good work that someone did, right? But it doesn't quite feel like you. Sometimes it's almost hard to take credit for it in a way. I find that with me.
Oh, I haven't found it hard to take credit for no, seriously, what I find is that when I look back on it, I think, did I write that?
Mm-hmm.
And then when I think, did I write that? Where did that come from? And I say, okay, now I'm going to write something else, and it'll just pour out of me. No, it's
no.
Oh,
No.
I'm gonna take that rope to the stars again, and have the stars just write it out, and I'm typing it. No. The stars say to you, it's over, honey. Sorry.
Yeah.
You did it. It was fun, but get out.
Yeah. They don't.
Wait till the next ride. And then hopefully someday, that day, that week, that year, the ride will come back.
Yeah.
Again.
You can't predict when it's going to happen. It happens when it happens.
No, you can't.
Yeah.
You can't. Where does it come from? I mean, yes, it comes from innate understanding of the character and everything, but why can't you get it back? I would do anything. Listen to me. I would do anything to get you back if I could just press a button and have it come back.
So, yeah. So was there, I'm writing something right now that I'm not supposed to talk about, so I can't talk about it, but
I know.
I asked them if there was any kind of Bible for the thing or any kind of guidelines, and they don't have any. I like it when there's some focus. Going back to the Andy Griffith show, this is one of the shows I know there was a rule for. So Andy would say to the writers, if a joke makes a liar out of the character, lose the joke, right? Yeah. And that was sort of a template, right, that they would follow. And so, there are scenes that aren't funny in that show because they're not meant to be because, well, there's no reason to have a joke here. We need just a utilitarian scene where this happens, or Andy's actually very upset here, and we'll let him be upset. Because a joke, we're not going to force the jokes in. And there were these rules, Andy was a Christian, so he wanted every show to have a Bible lesson in it. Now, that's not blatant. You can't tell. You can't watching the show. But I think it helped create a tone for the show. It helped create a direction for the show. It gave people a roadmap. And I'm wondering, was there any kind of roadmap? Were there any kind of rules or on Mary Tyler Moore show? Or was that just embodied in the two creators of the show?
No, there were no rules whatsoever. No rules whatsoever. We all instinctively understood if it's not right for the character. We followed the Andy Griffith rule without
knowing. Yeah. Without
knowing it. There was only one thing that we did do each year, which was when an actor is up for an Emmy, the Emmy judges don't look at the whole body of work. They look at one episode. Mm-hmm. And each year we would select one episode before it was written to be the Emmy episode.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I know that's unusual.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when Valerie lost her 20 pounds, and Jim and Alan called me in, they said, we want you to write it, because they knew that I'd been off and on, Weight Watchers, gaining and losing, and that I was close with Valerie. So, okay, I was going to, and they said, we want this to be Valerie's Emmy show. There was a show that Mary did win an Emmy for, and that was decided before I wrote the show for her, that was going to be her Emmy show. That was a show where she gets fired. Weirdly gets fired.
Mm-hmm.
And that was going to be her Emmy show because we wanted to have the scene, which Mary did so gorgeously. We wanted to have the scene where she's miserable and she wants to come back, and I had her cry twice in the scene. I had her. Well, anyway, I wrote it that way, and that was the only rule that we had, which was this show is selected. The Lou and Edie story was selected as Ed's Emmy show.
That always makes me sad. That episode always makes me sad. Still, I'll watch it. It'll make me sad. When Lou
really.
Oh yeah. It still makes me sad when I see it. Again, I think that the show at its best was always honest. It was honest. The emotions were always honest.
Yeah.
They were stories that had funny things in them. And it didn't feel like the show existed just to get laughs. It felt like it existed to explore these characters and take them on a journey, an emotional journey. And again, it wasn't always funny. When there's some Lou and Edie stuff that just isn't funny. It's real and it's sad. Yeah.
The Lou and Edie story, you said the end of it makes you sad.
Not the end of that, because that's the first one she comes back, right? Is that the first one when she leaves? No? Which one does she come back? She leaves. She doesn't leave him. That's when they break up because she's in school. That's a different one. Remember? And he's got his log. And he's going to, do you remember that? He's got his fire log and he's all prepared to have his fire. Anyway, that's a different one because at the end of that one, they're back together. But when Edie actually leaves, that makes me really sad. Yeah.
Would you have been as sad if there had been a joke if there had been a joke at the end after she leaves and she's leaving and he says, anytime if you want to come back, I'll take you right back.
Right. Yeah. I remember that.
Okay. That's how it ends now. If there had been a joke afterwards, would it have made you less sad?
Probably. I suppose if it was exactly the right joke, if there was honesty in that joke, then maybe. I mean, I guess it would depend on the joke, but it doesn't feel like that would be right. It felt like it ended the way it was supposed to for that story.
Well, because we had there was a conflict of one person said, this is an entertainment show. We don't want to make people sad. And I was on the side of, but it is sad.
Right.
And I was on the side of don't add a joke. So I just was
just curious. Am I a tiebreaker for a 50-year-old argument?
Bravo! Yes.
No, I think that's exactly right. I think that err on the side of honesty is probably always right. Here's what I think it did. for me is I'm more invested in the show. Every time those characters have a real struggle, I'm more invested in the show because it's real. What happens to them? What happens to Lou now that he's not with Edie? Those things become important to me, right? Because now I believe these people. It's all of the people. I can't believe they're not running around someplace doing stuff like those characters. I believe that they, live and breathe. That became a marker for me as a kid, actually, about how well a character was written. I would think, if I can imagine them living their life when the show is not on, then I know, like, I can imagine Rhoda and Mary going to see Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid or seeing The Sting. Like, I can imagine them going. I know exactly how that would go down. And it's like, yeah, I can see that. I can see Lou on the weekends. I can see their lives. And I feel like if I can't see their lives, they're not fleshed out enough. They're not dimensional enough.
They're just joke tellers.
They're just joke tellers. Yeah. And there are shows like that where I can't see them outside the show. I don't like those shows as much, but those are characters I honestly believe, not telling jokes, just hanging out. I can see it,
That's lovely. Yeah.
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 But that became one of my sort of markers as I was trying to learn this stuff. It's like, oh, you have to have characters that people can imagine outside of the box, outside of the TV screen. There's a thing in my head when I'm writing that it's a tape almost that runs as I'm writing characters, and it's how do I make them live? How do I make them live? How do I make them live? And it's in the back of my mind all the time. How do I make them into real people? How does that happen? And I don't know how it happens exactly, but I know having that question makes me do a better job.
And then when you finally do make them live, you're aware of it, right, Brian?
Yeah, I think so. Oh, I think so.
He's alive now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know when it clicks over, when it becomes that. But it does. Something clicks and you go, okay, that's I know how to write that person. And some characters, it's such a joy to write them and to spend time with them. I had a character who's the villain of a piece who was so much fun to write. He was smarter than me and more clever, and it was sort of just fun to be in his head. And he would say things, and I'm like, I would never say. I didn't even know where that came from, but that's what that guy would say,
May I say something?
Yeah.
He's not smarter than you. You created him.
But you know what I mean? It feels like that. I mean, have you ever written a character who's smarter than you or funnier than you or?
Oh, funnier. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I can't delete when I say something in real life, but I can delete it on the computer.
Well, there is that.
There is that.
But when you're writing in a certain voice,
yeah,
the voice can take over.
When you're lucky.
And then it's not you, and it can make you laugh. Neil Simon used to say that all the time, like, oh, I laugh all the time when I'm writing. Because, he's hearing the joke for the first time when he types it out. Right?
Oh, I love that. He's hearing the joke for the first time.
Sure. Yeah.
He's creating a baby and he's seeing the baby smile and how wonderful that is.
Yeah. So he types something for Felix Unger to say, and he's like, well, that's hilarious. He knows.
Oh, that's the FU thing.
Oh, that's so funny. That's so funny.
Where he didn't realize until later on when he signed it FU.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah,
I don't want to blow it for people who haven't seen the movie or the play, so I want them to see it. So,
okay.
The Odd Couple. Yeah.
That's a lesson in itself.
Yeah. So I just want to know what you, in that environment, now the shows were staffed differently. Like a lot of shows were freelance, right? Was the Mary Tyler Moore Show a staff in a room working together, or how did that work?
Nowadays, there's that phrase, the writer's room.
Right.
And that's when every single writer gets into the room and throws lines back and forth and concepts back and forth.
Right.
No, that wasn't present on Mary's show. At the very beginning, it would be Jim and Alan in a room with me. That was at the very beginning. As time went on, let's say in the second year, sometimes it would be Jim and Ed Weinberger and me, or once it was Alan and me. And the Alan and me show, I think, had slightly different color to it.
Okay.
I know at the beginning it was just a few writers. Steve Pritzker, who's a wonderful writer, he was in it from the beginning. I know that we never had a writer's room. We never had that. And I hear from friends of mine who are in writers' rooms that it's gotten ugly and competitive. It was just the opposite with us. Nobody cared who came up with the line. There was no pecking order. It was whoever came up with the line, great, And I would never go home without the first year. It would take a week. I would go in on a Monday, and it wasn't until a Friday that I would have the whole story. And then you send it in, bring it in, and they would approve.
How long did you have to write a script? How long would it take you to write a script?
It's so varied. There's a book that came out this week in which I read about myself. It was a book that was about, it included the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And in the book, it says that I took 2 months to write a script, which is not true.
Okay.
I take longer than most people. I don't know how long. Sometimes it would be 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or about a month, I think, for me. For other people, God, wow, I haven't talked about Aaron Sorkin.
Oh.
I have to talk about Aaron Sorkin just very quickly to say that when he was writing Sports Night, and when he writes so quickly.
Yeah.
He writes so quickly, and God, I hope the Trial of the Chicago 7 wins everything this year. God, how wonderful it is. But he said in one of his interviews that because he had a deadline all the time, he said he had to write things when he wasn't writing his best, and how it killed him, but he had to do it. We didn't have that. We had I started writing for the show 1969. It didn't go on until 1970. So we had a long time with those early scripts. The early ones were really the hardest because you were feeling your wins.
Trying to figure out the show. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the voice of the show and the tone of the show. That all makes perfect sense. One of the things I am curious about, because it's just now starting to be addressed again, and that is there were women writers on that show, and there weren't a lot of women comedy writers writing for television. There were staffs like on the Monkees or something where you'd be the only woman. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was the only woman.
What was that like?
Oh! I was the only woman writing without a partner.
And what was that like? And from what I understand, by the way, on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, is that they wanted the perspective of the women. When I was a kid, I didn't know who was writing the show. So I would marvel at how well I thought the women were written on that show. How are they doing this? The three sort of Mary, Rhoda, and Phyllis are very specific. They're not generic in any way. They're very specific people, all three of them.
Yeah.
And so well written and conceived that I would just marvel at how well they're written. And it's interesting to know, at least from what I do know, that they wanted the input of the women who were writing the show and their perspective. I've often found that if I'm the only black guy around and I have a perspective and the other people go, well, I don't know what you're talking about, right? Chris Rock said this about SNL, and so did Tina Fey, that with a room full of white men, it was very hard to pitch things sometimes because they would say, well, that's not funny. And Tina Fey, it's pretty funny. Right. So is Chris Rock. Pretty funny. So they know what's funny, but in a room full of people who don't have the background, don't have the references, don't have the point of view, it's easy to dismiss those points of view. It's interesting to know that on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, they sought out those points of view.
Yeah, sought out is exactly the word. Yeah, they sought out women writers. And I'm just remembering something that happened with this happened with my very first meeting on Mary Tyler Moore Show, where we would do the obligatory just talking thing before getting down to business.
Sure, of course.
And something had happened to me that I mentioned, and Alan said, "Oh, we can use that. Let's start the show with that." That's what it was, that I had been called ma'am.
Oh, today I am a ma'am.
Today I am a ma'am.
Yeah.
I had been called ma'am, and I was telling them what it was like, and how old do I look, and Alan said, "Oh, so let's start." So we did. That's what they got from Marilyn. Marilyn Miller is a wonderful, wonderful writer and person. And Marilyn came in with her partner. They would write such relatable stuff, wonderful, wonderful stuff, based on stuff that had happened to them. That's what Jim and Alan were after.
Right.
I think that Alan was influenced by his wife in wanting authenticity in the women characters. You always have to think, who are the influences?
Right. Sure. Yeah. And if he was listening to his wife and paying attention to what she was saying, then yeah. That makes sense.
And Jim at that point was married to a feminist, but I think it was just innate to both of them that they wanted to write characters that were authentic. It was, the time had come. Yeah.
Well, there's an episode, I tell people all the time, there's an episode where Mary is upset because she finds out that the man who did her job before she had it got more money. And that's, part of an episode that long ago, right? And what I mean? It's still a problem now. So that it's still the same problem. And so I can only imagine what it was like to bring it up then, right?
Radical.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to tell you something that you will, I think, I know you'll appreciate this. We had Gordy was the weatherman.
Right.
And Jim said, these are the characters, and Gordy's the weatherman. And he said, he thinks that it would be funny when Phyllis comes in, for her to assume that because Gordy is black, that he's the sportscaster.
Mm-hmm.
And because the cliche, black people, sports, that's it. And John Amos was so good. He was so good. Yeah. So yeah, he was the weatherman.
Yeah.
The thing about our raising issues, it didn't happen that much. Of course, we were on at the same time as All in the Family.
Right.
And it was, issue.
Yeah.
Which was incredibly forward thinking, of course.
Sure.
That show doesn't need me to say that, but ours were more subtle.
Yeah, I would say that that's true. I mean, I don't think Vietnam came up more than once or twice on the show, and that was happening.
Did it come up?
It came up once. There's a friend of Lou's who's kind of has the hots for Mary, and I think he spent some time in Vietnam being like a correspondent. I forget the character's name. I forget the show, but he's the one who's like, all of a sudden he's like, I'm in love with Mary, but he just met her. But I think he spent some time in Vietnam, but I think it only came up like that. Like, oh, he's a correspondent who goes all over. He's been to Vietnam. I think it was on a list of things. It wasn't anything about Vietnam. And at that time in my life, Vietnam had been going on my whole life. So it was part of the news.
Oh.
Right.
Oh. So that was the world you were in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't quite understand what it was. My uncle was there. I remember when he got his orders to go. But I still didn't know exactly what it was. I remember, though, it was the first time I saw a grown man cry when he got his orders to go.
Oh.
Yeah. I remember that. I remember him with my grandmother and him crying and her comforting him. Yeah. That's all I know about Vietnam, really. But that's, that's a lot, actually. But it didn't come up on the show because the show didn't deal with issues in that way. Yeah. It did deal with issues, but it didn't deal with them that way. And I think also coming on right when that wave of the women's movement was sort of getting going and becoming a big deal. It's interesting. I think if that show had been on 5 or 10 years earlier, it wouldn't have been the same show at all. It wouldn't have gotten on. No.
As is, it wouldn't have gotten on.
No, it couldn't get on, right?
It couldn't get on.
Yeah. Mary's not married. Right. All these things.
You'll never make it after all.
Yeah.
You're just a girl.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was, I don't think people understand exactly how groundbreaking it was, even though it didn't do it in the most, it was right out there with All in the Family. It was forward. It was right out there. And in fact, I think that's one of the reasons that show, as good as it was, doesn't age as well, I think, because the politics are so much of their day, of that moment, of what Nixon is doing or what, you know what I mean? And so unless you know all that stuff, it's sort of hard to follow along, I think. For people.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas Mary, it's like, again, a woman who doesn't feel good about how she looks, that's not going anywhere. That is, you know what I mean? Yeah. Or unfortunately, a woman not making as much as a man, that doesn't seem to be going anywhere. Right. So it dealt with things that are more evergreen, I think.
It benefited by the era that it was in.
Yeah.
Not even the era, those particular years.
Yeah.
I mean, 1968, 1969, had it been in 1962, 63, that was still the Kennedy years.
Right.
That was still when your hair had to be exactly that the movie Coming Home is Jane Fonda.
Yeah. Did Hal Ashby do that?
Yes.
Yeah, Hal Ashby.
Hal Ashby. Where at the beginning, her hair was exactly under, and then after her husband went away and she was influenced by her best friend, and then her hair was all over the place, natural, and
Sure.
we were living through exactly what was happening. What was happening in the real world was not happening in the TV world, except with Norman Lear.
Right.
But in the other shows, nothing like that was happening. So our show progressed along with it.
Yeah, it really did.
Rhoda and Phyllis were much more aware of the changes. Mary had to be dragged in, and Mary Richards was never completely changed by the events. She was more typical of her background, her Protestant Midwestern, with her parents, with her.
But she did grow. I mean, she did push back on things like having to get coffee sometimes, or like, why am I?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm the associate producer. Why am I doing this? And it came up in, I think, very real ways. The way that stuff often comes up, especially, I think sometimes there has to be a critical mass. There have to be enough people complaining about something for people to hear it. And if you're alone, you often don't say things. You know what I mean? I'm alone here. I'm not going to rock the boat. I'm not going to say things.
I don't want people pointing at me.
Yeah. There has to sort of be a critical mass. And then you're like, oh, well, I'm backed up by all these other people who are having the same experience, or, but when you're out there alone, it's a different thing. I kept you too long. So I could talk to you forever. I really could talk to you forever, and I hope we get to talk more. No, we don't need a show to do this.
That's so lovely. I was thinking the exact same thing.
Oh, really?
I was thinking, why should it end? Boom, and that's it. Well,
it doesn't have to. You are a joy to talk to, and like I say, you're foundational. Like I said, like I wouldn't be the same human being probably if I hadn't watched that show. And I know I wouldn't be the same writer. I know it. I learned so much from it, and I still learn from it when I watch it. I think that's so smart what they did right there. It means the world to have talked to you. So thank you. It means the world to have you on the show. So I could thank you for half an hour. So I won't do that. But thank you for all the work you've done, and thanks for being a guest on the show.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks for watching You Are a Storyteller, part of the Co-Loop Podcast Network. If you have any questions, or if there's a topic you'd like us to cover, leave a comment below or email us at hello@beliefagency.com.